now. Remember that all of the sessions that are recorded, you can find in Raxels and LACPASS. I will want to share my screen now and give you a little bit of context of where we are now, and we begin with today's session. At the middle of May, according to our planning, let's remember that today's workshop is frameworked in the LACPASS project and the convergence of LACPASS initiatives. And our objective for this month is to test transactions and test the NDCH module and what will be the regional module that we will use for Connectathon LACPASS. And we are finishing the vaccination certificate from IPS. So I hope next month we will be able to do some tests in this regard with the tools that are already available in the Docker that was already provided to you. But first, obviously, doing a little bit of training in terms of terminology. Another piece of information that is quite preliminary is that this agenda will suffer changes. The Connectathon LACPASS will be rescheduled in order to have a little bit of more time. The official information will be given in the next STIRCO. And once that the final definitions from the PAHO and IDB, we will send the formal relevant invitations. So just for now, I would like to tell you that this will undergo some changes in terms of the planning. We might include an activity related with what we have here, and therefore we might have more time to do some specific testing. Our second LACPASS Connectathon, it wants to test the IPS profile, also the immunization certificate in order, according to the DDCC, will do with yellow fever and with other immunizations, I hope so. And the optional LAC chain, we will be working with them in order to test signatures based on in blockchain, especially for these certificates, as you well know. This is our technical route. We are still working in this pyramid with the IPS, and the objective is that we can understand the structure and exchange these IPSs. And once we understand this, we will take the next step, which is to obtain this certification for immunization from the IPS. What is coming in the next weeks within this workshop framework? We are in the second workshop for transactions, is what we will be seeing today. We had a first workshop associated to IPS and to the basic tools that have been given. So you can revisit in Raxel's module and then the YouTube channel. I don't know if the presentation was uploaded there. I will be checking that, but the recordings are there. And once we have today's workshop, obviously, this is the opening of the technical work. Some countries manage to publish and they have internet, and some others are in waiting because there are some regulations that they need to comply with in order to have this exit. So basically the process, the testing process will be opened up for the coming weeks. And in relation to the workshops themselves, we will introduce within this workshop of transactions and what's coming with a transformation in order to obtain the vaccination certificate from the IPS. We will have two terminology workshops. Let's not forget that there are some terminological documents that have been made available in LACPASS. And before working on the transformations, I would like you to understand what is available, what is the mapping that can be carried out, because even though we will use it for this case and aiming at what we want to do for our connectathon, these are tools that probably will be useful for others and maybe for other uses in each of your countries. So it's good to know what is available and what can be done in terms of these terminological services. The dates are to be confirmed because we don't know if we can do this in 1 or 2 workshops, but it will have to be obviously from the first week of June and June 29. We expect to have the third workshop based on what we're working now with IPS, which is to get this vaccination certificate. This is what I had to tell you today. I took 6 minutes, and now I will give the floor to Sergio Peñafiel, who's the technician for the LACPASS project. And he will be presenting this workshop because I understand there are a couple of requirements and questions. So we will try to answer all of those. So Sergio, please, the floor is yours. Good afternoon, everyone. As Carlos said, we will have a transactions workshop, basically. Give me a second. Firstly, we will see a presentation which is very similar as what was shown in the last technical regional workshop, but we will do a summary of that. And the second part of this workshop will be more interactive. We will ask you, I will be giving a live demo of the transactions, but we will ask you that you can also do them with us. So I will tell you when we begin with that part. So in order to give you context, the IPS projects, we will use transactions which are MHD transactions that are for consulting different types of documents, and it also can be used for consulting IPS documents for this summary, international patient summary. And we will be using the ITI 65 to ITI 68 transactions, which are on screen, and to explain them, the 65 one, which is called provide document, what it does is that it registers and persists an IPS in an FHIR local server. So each one of you have the new country installed in your structure, which is what we have made available in the repository. And this new country has a FHIR server and an IPS server, which allows you to generate this transaction. So in order to build and persist in the IPS in your own server. Then the 66 transaction allows you to identify a patient. It's like an identifier to look at all of the list of documents that that patient has. So you can, in this way, you can know what documents have been generated for a patient, or if no document has been generated, or if nothing was found associated to that patient in the server. 67 is very similar to 65, but it allows you to find references to documents. This means with a patient identifier, we will know what there is, but also have a reference to it to get to the document. And the 68 transaction actually retrieves the document and by using the reference that I already have. These are the 4 transactions that we will be using. Maybe number 66 we won't use that much, but 65, 67, and 68 we will use. This is a flow chart of how the messages are, and that will be exchanged between the nodes. The first thing is that there are 3 types of activities that we want to do. First is to generate and persist an IPS. As I said before, we use the transaction 65. And the idea is that from any information system that you might have, you can generate the IPS bundle and then call on the mediator of the new country, and register in the IFIRE. And this is done internally, and each country then should generate their own IPS and store it in the IFIRE server. The next activity is to consult nodes in IPS to the entire network. This is where we start interacting between the country nodes. And for that, we have a regional node in a centralized fashion that is basically is used as a proxy of all the questions done. So as a country node, you can consult transaction 66 or 67 to look for document list and references. And instead of going directly to ask this in a country node in your national directory, you can do this consultation in the regional node, and the regional node will do a broadcast and to all the country nodes that are enabled. That's why it's important that the servers have a public output. And then this will be information will be compiled and get back to this country node. So this country will receive an answer in iFire as if any iFire node would have been consulted, but behind the regional node actually asked the remaining country nodes and 67 and 68 are for obtaining the IPS bundle. Then you can do a direct communication between nodes, and you don't need the broadcast to do that because the transaction, the previous one, gave you a complete URL on how to obtain that resource. Now, detailing the transaction 65, which is one of the most important ones, we have normally the consultations are done directly in the FIRE server. We have seen this in previous workshops and in the previous versions of the Docker Compose. But in the latest version, we have a new service which acts as a gateway to all of the questions from the FIRE server, and especially for those questions that create an IPS bundle, and it converts it into a transaction that complies with the 65 standard. So what it does is that it takes this IPS bundle and it transforms it into a bigger document. And inside this bigger document, which we call transaction, in fact, you have a bundle IPS. It will be here, it will persist, but it separates all of the resources that are inside the bundle. Because in the bundle, as we saw in the previous workshop, there is a list of entries, and each entry is a different resource. It could be a patient, a practitioner, an alert intolerance or whatever exists there. And what this mediator that does is to separate these components and tell the FIRE server to create them as separate resources, but keeping the references obviously to these patients and to the bundle. So that's what the mediator does, apart from having the bundle and creating separate resources, and then create the two resources that the standard asks, which is a list and the document reference associated to these bundle IPS, which persist in this FIRE server. So if you did a post of the bundle directly into the FIRE server, the only thing that keeps in the FIRE service will be the bundle of IPS. When you try to look for that document, you won't find it because you don't have the document reference nor the list. So what you have to do is to do that same post and the same request, but instead of aiming directly at the FIRE servers, you go to the mediator, and the mediator transforms this request and converts it into all of this greater transaction that we see on screen. So that is important because we saw that some countries are kind of lost there. And so instead of asking the question 8080, you do it in 3000 where the mediator is. Here, as a note, And as part of what we are requiring in order to participate in the Connectathon is that all the bundle IPS have two identifiers at least. One national identifier, the ones that you normally use, and an international identifier that would hopefully be the passport of the patient. So when we do the consultation in the node, we will be able to look for it in the national and the international identifiers. Then the next transaction is the 66, which is to find a document list. Basically, you just call on the FHIR resources directly. And here is where you call the list resource. And what's interesting, or what we gain doing this, is that within the query of you can specify the identifier of the patient. So I can indicate what a patient I'm looking for with his or her identifier, and it gives me that information. The 67 is the same, but here we look for a document reference instead of a list. And I can also give a patient identifier directly in the query. And this request in particular response here, if you read this, you'll see that it's also a bundle. So it has a list of entries like all bundles, and where each entry should be a document reference that it found. And for each of these document references, you go to the content and URL, and there you will find a URL of that goes to the IPS of that specific patient. And this URL is a complete URL. It has the prefix of the system of the host, and then you have what follows. But you can go directly, you can do a get on this URL, which is the next query to obtain the document, the retrieve document. So you do a get into what the previous transaction gave you. And this is an IPS as such, as we saw in the previous workshop. It has all of the parts, the composition, and all of the resources that follow. This is a summary of what we saw in the latest technical committee and what you should have implemented in the last Docker Compose. Maybe now that you implemented it, it's a little bit more clear for you. But as I said before, the idea is to do this presentation more interactive. So in order to do that, I would like to share with you a collection of postmen.
Les voy a compartir por el chat este link.
I think I'll give you this link through the chat, where you will find the transactions with which we will be working. If you open up this Postman collection, you will find something similar to this, where you will see an interface of Postman. Here I'm looking at the web version, but if you have the desktop version, it should look quite similar to this, where you have various requests, especially all of the ones that we're looking at is from 65 to 68. And the first thing that you have to do is go to variables and change some variables for the ones that correspond to your case. We have three variables here, as you can see. The first is the FHIR service, which is this is hosted in its structure. We have a testing version. For those of you that have not uploaded your FHIR service, you can use this one that we have in this URL. But if you have yours already implemented, I will ask you please to change this for the URL where you have your FHIR server, with a port included, or with the domain just with that. The next one is the IPS mediator. As I said before, that if you raise the Docker Composer, which is in 3000, we ask you to change this to your URL that you have in your structure. If you haven't raised it, you can use the one that we make available in LACPASS, and you can use that if necessary. When are you changing the variables? Or if there's a connection for me? Here in the collection, if you click on the collection, you should have various tabs. There's one called variables at the very end, and then you should have these three appearing there on your screen. Yes, they appear, but they're blocked. Okay, if it doesn't work, you can do a copy of this. You do a copy paste or do a copy, I think, and you should be able to change that if it doesn't allow you to change these values. So the first thing is that you change these values. And then the last one is the broadcast server. You should not change this one because this is the regional node where we have the broadcast that asks the rest of the other nodes. And currently it's also LACPASS create.cl with a port 5000. We will probably migrate this to Raxel. But in the meantime, and for the purposes of this workshop, this is the URL of the broadcast server. And you don't have to change this one, but the other ones, yes, this one you should change to your country node. Following with this, you will find, you can see in the documentation part, 5 endpoints that come with the Postman connection, and each one is explained right here, where, as I said, these are the 4 transactions that we just saw, and there's one extra one called trusted parties. And what it does is to obtain a list with all the participating countries that have their public version of the Fire server. So that is the first one I want to show you. This is the request for this endpoint. And what it does is a new request, which is done by the broadcast to this URL / trusted party, and it answers a guess where you will find all of the Fire service of the countries that are already enabled. So first you will find our LACPASS test server that will be there. We will just leave it there until for the purposes of this workshop tests. And then we have the servers that you provided us with information. We have the one from Paraguay with the corresponding Fire server. We also have the one from Peru, Ecuador, and Suriname. These are the 4 countries that manage to have a public server. And we could make tests between servers. So this endpoint is good for you to obtain the participating countries. And as you can see in the future, it will be useful so you can get the public signature points and other issues. But for the time being, we'll just use the Fire URL that we see here. This is a more informative endpoint. If you don't want to use the broadcast server and you want to implement one yourselves, you can ask here directly. This is the first one, so you have it, and you keep this in mind. The following one is the ITI 65 provide document, and this is a request done to the IPS mediator. to the service that is in the port 3000 if you're using the Docker Compose. The request here is a post bundle, and this creates a bundle. But as I said in the presentation, it does more than just that. Here you have to put an IPS completely, as we saw in the previous workshop, how they were built. So to put an IPS here, I have an IPS example, and you will also have one in your Postman. I will execute this in order to do a test. And what it will give you, as opposed to doing a post bundle normal, that is normal, is that it will tell you all of the resources that were created. Here it tells me that the composition, the patient was created in a device. So all of the resources separately, not only by bundle, will be created in the Fire service, but also all of the separate resources will be done. And if you go at the end, you will get two extra resources, which is the document reference for this Fire service and also list. Now with this resource, you should be able to persist the IPS that you have generated to the new country server that you have. So in order to do the tests for this workshop, the ones that we do between countries, what you need is to know the identifier of this patient. So for that, this IPS has an identifier. It's a little bit down here. I think this is the test one, but here you will also file with the transaction 66. You can go find the document list for a patient. I have an identifier here that I uploaded it using the previous transaction. So now I can look for this patient in my Fire service. I look for the document list for this patient that has this identifier. So I execute this and it answers me in this way. It tells me that this is a search set bundle, which is the result of a search. It tells me how many values it found. It found two lists. In the links, it tells me where do I find this. In this URL, and then there's a list with all of the results that it found, which is the list for this patient that I found. The idea is that you do these transactions now. We will do a little pause in the workshop so you can test the 65 and 68. And for this workshop in particular, we have this URL that I will leave it in the chat. And this is a shared Excel file where you can tell us the identifier of a patient that is in your server. For example, this is the one I just tested, and the country from where you are in order to consult this. So the idea is that you upload a patient IPS using this, check it that it arrived in the server with the ITI 66. And if it's okay, you just copy in this Excel sheet, you copy the identifier for that patient. And then we can do the test with the next transactions, 67 and 68. For example, I'm LACPASS. I can do a query on Ecuador's maybe server, for example. So we will give you a few minutes so you can do the first two transactions. If you already have a patient registered, or just let me know, just put the copy paste the identifier in the Excel spreadsheet. And we will wait for a few minutes and then we come back with the last two transactions and the tests between nodes.
Bueno, entre medios, si alguien tiene alguna pregunta, podemos...
And if you have a question, maybe we can check that too.
Espera, yo no tenía ningún paciente PPPA, pero da lo mismo eso. Finalmente estoy buscando los ejemplos que hay.
I'm looking for a patient and maybe to test that. If you don't have a patient on hand, you can test this with the patients that we have here as a test or example. But if you have any other, it would be good that you upload it.
Si ocupan los de ejemplo, al menos modifica el ID ahí, Jorge. Ocupa un ID que...
You can use an ID that we could use, maybe one that you use like with an identifier.
Había mandado la URL del Excel, pero que no llegó.
I had sent the URL of the Excel spreadsheet, but I don't know if you got it.
Estoy verificando y sí.
I'm verifying here. Yes, yeah, it arrived.
Chat por el link a Postman Abner.
Dice que pide login. Sí, probablemente.
Probably you have to create an account to do that.
Ya, ahí estamos viendo que hay un... Perú agregó un paciente con identificador.
Okay, here Peru added a patient with its identifier. We will wait another couple of minutes to see if another country adds on an identifier.
Si no les permite ejecutar el Postman, les recomiendo que hagan una
If you
copia.
can't execute the postman, do a copy here and duplicate, and then you will be able to do changes and execute them.
Ah, bueno, un fork. Sí, disculpe.
Create a fork. Yes, it's this one here.
Ya, Uruguay también subió un paciente.
Uruguay also uploaded a patient, but they don't have their public server yet.
muestra de nuevo dónde está create a fork, Sergio, para Miguel y que lo
Sergio,
pueda
please
ver.
show where create a fork is so people can know where it is and how to create it. In the collection, you have to press on the 3 dots, and then that takes you to create a fork down here.
Ya, entonces vamos a continuar con las
So we
otras
will
dos,
continue
transacciones.
with the
Como
other
saben,
two transactions. As I said before, the following one is find document reference. You can do it directly to your Fire server and it will answer. But then you would do a search just in your own infrastructure. You can do the same query just by changing the URL to this broadcast server, which is LACPASS.create CL 5000. And then what this server will do is look throughout all of the nodes in the countries that have provided this. So if I do this query with the first identifier that we have for this test, what it's doing is calling on the broadcast server and it does the query in all of the countries' nodes. As you can, the result that it gives you is the same as the previous one. It says bundle of a search set type. And in this case, it found 2 also. In this case, the query was done to various servers. You can see the link of all the queries that this server did. So first it asked the LACPASS server, which is the one we have for the test. Then it also asked the Paraguay service if they know this patient. Then it asked the Peruvian, the Suriname, Uruguay. And all of those servers are asked for the same patient. And then it compiles everything in this answer. This is the result of the document reference that is found in this service. It found it in the LACPASS server that I had uploaded. And as I said before, in content, attachment, and URL, you should be able to find the Fire bundle. Now, what can happen is that you have the route of the Docker Compose, because when you upload the service, obviously, the service internally does not know the URL where the server will be finally deployed. So in order to prevent this from happening, and this is probably an error that everybody will encounter, but in the future, we will add where you can put the correct host to put it as a prefix here. But for the time being, what you can do is that up here, you will see the URL in LACPASS, and here we would have to take the bundle's ID from here. It queried all of the servers, so I could go back to this and using one of the patients that were written down here, like the one from Peru. And if I do the query, it also goes through all the servers. And in this case, it found 1. It also asked all of the 5 previous servers, and it found it finally in the Peruvian server, this document reference associated to this patient. And also you can see the URL of the IPS bundle. You will see the Happy Fire 8080 for now, but in the future, we will correct this part. But what we wanted to show you that with the same endpoint, with the broadcast and the same structure of the request, the Fire request, the 67 find document, you can ask the entire network. those that are registered or recorded in the network. And then the transaction 68 is that having this URL correctly formatted, I will copy it so you can get a get, you can do a get on here directly. I could do a get here and I copy this part. And then I find the IPS that the Peruvian team is sharing and associate it with the patient that had that identifier. That's how finally this is the patient summary. That's the way you would obtain the information from other countries. You have to use the transaction 67 with the patient identifier that will give you the URL that you need. And that's how you can do a get directly and obtain the relevant information. Also here, if you want to try this out, if we can give you a couple of minutes, if you have questions, and if you would like to check this out.
Sí. Y bueno, como están, la idea de este workshop, como se fijaron, ya estamos.
The idea of this workshop, as you can see, we are working between countries, and in the Connectathon, probably all the tests will be similar to this, where there will be maybe some tests to upload documents, others to look for reference documents or document lists, or IPS bundles directly. So if you have all of this ready and complete, you shouldn't have any problem in participating in the Connectathon.
Ecuador subió su ID, Sergio.
Ecuador uploaded its ID. Yes, I think he uploaded the example one. In fact, this is an interesting case because probably this will be in various services. It was found 11 times. But it should have found it if you are in LACPASS.
Y también lo encuentra en
And
el servidor.
it also finds it in this server. As a test, it's also interesting to see how an identifier can be in various country nodes, and broadcast is the one that compiles them all in that one single request. As you can see, various are in the Ecuador server, but others are in the LACPASS server. So the document reference finds all of these documents too. And to complete the exercise, we can do 68. I'm going to copy it here. On the ID, to see that if we are finding the correct information.
Está tardando un poco, no sé si lo copié bien, creo que sí. Bueno, hay medio timeout, no sé. Acá
Here, we're doing a query. I will check the logs later.
Sergio, si está levantado el servicio
They're
de
asking
mediator.
if the mediator service is already up.
No, Carlos.
Adelante,
La
Cristian.
pregunta era para Jorge, que preguntaba qué podía
The
ser.
question was for Jorge, that it might be a mistake.
Sí, no, no te preocupes, Micho.
Don't worry, Mitchell.
Porque de hecho, le estaba pegando el mismo de LACPASS.
In fact, I was pasting this in the LACPASS one. The LACPASS should be up there in the mediator unless something happened before the workshop.
Sí, está arriba, lo acabo de revisar.
Y también Bruno tiene el mismo error.
El error con el puerto 3000.
Bruno also has an issue there.
Sí, bueno, si tienen errores,
Well, if you have errors in raising the service, maybe we could check them out one by one.
Así que para respondiéndole más a Bruno.
So to answering Bruno, because that's what he asked in the chat. This workshop is just the starting point. It's the first step. This will be left open, and in the coming weeks, especially for those countries that have not been able to get their public servers, the idea is to create IPSs and do exercises and, upload the IDs and continue doing this exercise throughout the weeks. Maybe each country should have an enabled server for this. The idea is that we have an idea is that a question. I was checking that out. I was trying to find out to start from immediately to start asking for that, to request that. Yes, the idea is that it's open, or at least that you give access to the broadcast server. That would be the minimum requirement, and also to the other country nodes. But yes, for Conectaton, when you do the registration of systems in Gazelle, it will probably ask you that it's public too. If it's something that you should start doing. I understand that all the countries might have security issues involved, but this is more like a test. They might not even use data from real life patients. So maybe that might help you to achieve that public opening up of your servers.
Sí. Ya, entonces, en los últimos minutos que quedan.
So in the last few minutes that we have, I would like to summarize what we saw today, which is the transactions MHD. It's good that you get to know them, each one of these, and then you can use them. In this postman, we gave you examples of all of the transactions with the LACPASS test server that we have, but the idea is that you use your own server. If you couldn't do it now, maybe when you have it uploaded, the ideal thing would be that you test it and the broadcast service will be enabled. We enabled it today, and it will probably be up and running until the connectathon, so you can use it. You can do the same test maybe in other times. The broadcast server is quite robust. If any country can't use the servers that were here, you can skip them. At least you will always be able to test the test patients that we already have uploaded in LACPASS. If any of you have a public infrastructure after this workshop, we might add them to the participating countries into the broadcast. And with that, you will be able to do the relevant test. And then other countries might see if they get to their nodes. We will also enable this. We will leave it so you can have this as a reference for some patients that you can try out in the networks nodes. And if you have other patients, you can add them into this Excel file list. The idea of this workshop was to show you that we have the infrastructure ready in order to do queries and between nodes. And now the test should be completed. As we could see, Peru was ready. We could do a test with them. So that's great. And Ecuador, I don't know, in the end, there was a timeout, but if that is corrected, then it would be okay. And the other countries can test everything. If you have any doubts, we have the Slack channel enabled, and we are attentive to resolve any doubts. And if there's something more specific to check out, we could do a short one-on-one meeting with you and just check out any issues that might rise. Yes, I would like to reinforce what Sergio said. This is already up and running. It's basically a kickoff of these meetings. Basically, you have the opportunity to publish and expose your service and start sharing so we can interact between all of the participating countries. So in the Connectathon exercise will be similar, but through Gazelle. And at the moment, at the time, we will have a presentation from Gazelle, and there we will see a webinar for connectivity issues and to see what the Connectathon will be. But we still have a couple of months to go. But the idea now is that you could, upload your local nodes, see if you have issues, and we can, through internal channels, we can answer your doubts and share and publish your local notes so we can interact. And the exercise we're doing today is good. I will give, the floor to Fernando that knows much more about the interoperability in the health area, because I think, Fernando, take the floor. I would like to congratulate all of you and the countries that have their servers and those that are already starting to test this out, and we can see that it works. And we are very well aligned. What the transactions are international transactions that we might validate with Gazelle, and they will be replicated probably within the countries. Also, the truth is that I would like to congratulate this group because this represents a big advance for the companies and what it's being done. The issue of the identifiers, we've been working on them, right? I think it's the best workaround that we have so far, and for the broadcast model will continue. And also to tell you that the people are already checking this for the use of the change of data between the nodes of the different countries and with FHIR. I think so. We would like to encourage countries to continue, and we are advancing very well. And the idea is to have, the guidelines there. This is being done very well. So we have very good news to continue moving forward. Now, Carlos just needs to confirm when we're going to have it. We hope that that definition will be totally taken and to be able to communicate, but in the next committee, SteerCo, we will define that. I think we will be at the end of this month or the beginning of the next month. We need to still know if we need to make a decision or maybe have a voting, but otherwise we'll be around that date. And then we will have the definite date, or at least the week of the Connectathon, because we know it is going to happen, and also the venue, the host country, that as a SteerCo, we still need to define that. But beginning next month, we should have those certainties. We also need the certainties to plan accordingly in terms of the scheduled dates. So there is activities in Slack. Let's use the channels, and also our team will be ready to check the technical issues. And if we can't use the chat Slack, if we can't do it through there, Sergio, we can do a one-on-one meeting. So the test channels are open, and any other knowledge. I think we have a technical committee next week, so we will communicating some novelties or maybe raising some statuses. So on my behalf, I have nothing more to say. Thank you for being present today. I think it was a very productive workshop, and so let's go. We're beginning to walk, so we are very enthusiastic for what we're seeing right now. Thank you, and we will see each other soon. Take care.
Adiós.
Gracias,
Fernando.
Carlos.
Muchas
México,
gracias.
Chile. Todo el mundo.
Saludos a todos.